Hey everyone. Tonight we're drifting back to the candle-lit docks of Odessa in the winter of 1838, where the air smells of tar, brine, and the faintest whiff of bureaucratic embarrassment. If you like, dim the lights, settle your shoulders, and let the Black Sea fog creep in through the window. We'll stay here a good long while. No jolts, no surprises. Just the soft clink of rigging and the slow shuffle of municipal hypocrisy. Now, wife selling was already supposed to be a quaint memory, the sort of thing enlightened governors mentioned with a delicate cough and a comment about remote districts. But Odessa, glittering, cosmopolitan, feverishly ambitious Odessa, still kept the option on its books, like a dusty decanter of something illegal that nobody quite throws away. The statute was brief. A bankrupt householder may, with mutual consent, transfer his spouse by public auction, provided the purchaser furnish surety of good conduct. Note the phrase, mutual consent, added in 1822 after an earlier incident involving a Cossack, a priest, and an accidental canon. Consent, in practice, meant the woman nodded once the halter was already around her neck. The law required no written proof, only the nod. Because of course it didn't. Our woman enters the record on 14 January 1838. The Port Health Quarantine List calls her Martha G., age 27, pregnant, literate signature refused. That last clause appears whenever someone makes an X instead of a name. The clerk's pen hovers, sighs, moves on. Martha's husband, listed directly above her, is Gavril G., Cooper, insolvent. His occupation is the only thing about him that ever mattered to history. He made barrels that didn't quite hold water, and now he is about to dispose of a wife he also failed to keep contained. The municipal auction block stood at the foot of the stone steps leading down from the grain exchange. On sale days, they rolled out a small oak platform, the surface darkened by decades of fish oil and sheep urine. A single iron ring waited in the center, perfect for slipping a rope, or, if you preferred tradition, a plated horse halter, through. Buyers gathered at noon after the customs bell rang and the clerks finished their tea. The crowd was mostly ship captains looking for cheap deckhands, brothel keepers with an eye for convalescent charm, and a few smugglers who enjoyed the tax-free status of a human being once she stepped aboard a vessel. British and Russian consuls watched from upstairs windows, sipping coffee, pretending they were somewhere else. Newspaper correspondents called the scene picturesque local color, which was 19th century shorthand for please don't tell Parliament. Gavril led Martha up the steps, according to the single surviving halter receipt, filed by mistake among invoices for hemp cordage. He purchased 1 halter, stout, 3 kopecks, charged to vendor. Even in his final act of husbandry, he managed to bill her for the rope. Martha wore 2 dresses, one on top of the other, because January on the docks is a lesson in humility. Her pregnancy was obvious, the kind that makes onlookers politely inspect their boots. The clerk announced her virtues in a bored monotone. Martha G., honest, sober, capable of laundering and limited cookery. Child and venter Samir included gratis. Then he invited opening bids, starting at 50 kopecks, roughly the price of a defective barrel. A murmur, a shuffle, and the first hand rose. Captain Yevstafy Bargamalov of the brig St. Nicholas, a man whose personal hygiene had long since surrendered to Black Sea humidity. He offered 50 kopecks exactly, perhaps hoping the baby would double as ship's boy in a few years. Before the clerk could close, another voice cut through the fog. 1 ruble. The speaker was Captain Luca Borelli, Genos by birth, Ottoman by flag, smuggler by vocation. Borelli dressed like a bankrupt dandy. once bright silk waistcoat, boots that had met salt water one too many times. He leaned against a bollard with the languid confidence of someone who had already hidden 6 crates of undeclared cognac in a lighthouse. Gavrill's eyes glittered. Here was competition, the auctioneer's dream. He whispered to Marfa, probably some last-minute coaching on how to look sturdy. She stared past him at the masts rocking in the harbor, counting them the way other women count rosary beads. Bogomolov scowled. 1 ruble 20. Borelli yawned. 2. The bid jumped to 3, then 4. By the time it reached 5 rubles, the captains were no longer bidding for a housekeeper. They were bidding for pride, for the sleepless nights each had spent listening to the other's cargo being unloaded in the dark. At 7 rubles, Bogomolov's voice cracked. At 8, he produced a stained notebook and began calculating interest on a loan he hadn't yet taken. Borelli, sensing hesitation, smiled the thin smile of a card sharp who has already palmed the ace. 10 rubles, and I'll throw in passage anywhere she cares to go. The clerk glanced at Gavrill, who was now sweating vodka. 10 rubles represented 3 months' wages for a cooper who could still pay his tab. He nodded eagerly. Going once, going twice, Marfa lifted her hand. Not the haltered nod the statute required, but an actual hand, palm open, like a pedestrian stopping a runaway cart. "I will speak," she said. Her accent was Ukrainian with a seasoning of Port Greek. The clerk later described it as unexpectedly articulate. The crowd hushed, half amused, half alarmed. Women sometimes wept, sometimes fainted, but they did not usually hold up proceedings as if requesting a waltz. She stepped forward, rope dangling like a forgotten necklace. "Gentlemen," she began. Yes, she actually addressed them as gentlemen. "You bargain over me as if I were a cask of herring. Very well, I accept the highest bid, provided the purchaser also takes my husband." She gestured to Gavrill, who blinked as though someone had just addressed a block of wood. "After all," she continued, "he is the one who cannot manage money. I can cook, so keep accounts. He can only make holes in things, so 10 rubles for the pair of us or the sale is void." A ripple of laughter quickly stifled. Merriment was bad for business. Borelli recovered first. "Madam, I have no need of a cooper." "Then I will buy myself," she answered. The law, she reminded them, allowed a married woman no property, but it said nothing about a woman once she was sold. If the buyer refused the amended contract, the auction must restart from 0, and this time she would bid. She had, she declared, exactly 0 kopecks, and therefore offered the only price she could afford. The clerk opened his mouth, closed it, looked around for a superior official, found none. The statute had never imagined this scenario, because of course it hadn't. Bogomolov saw his chance. "I'll take you both for 8, he barked. Borelli countered, 9, and the husband stays ashore. Back and forth, 9.5, 10 again. With each new offer, Marfa nodded politely, as if they were discussing the weather. Finally, Borelli, desperate to salvage pride and cognac profits, shouted, 15 rubles, and the cooper can rot in debtor's prison. The gavel, really just a cracked ruler, came down before Gavrill could protest. 15 rubles, a fortune, enough to buy a small boat or drink oneself to death in style. Marfa extended her hand for the money. Borelli, still bemused, counted out banknotes. She tucked them into her outer dress, the gesture smooth, practiced, as if she had been saving tips all her life. Then she did something no statute anticipated. She turned to the clerk and requested a bill of sale, not as merchandise but as purchaser. The clerk, whose day had already exceeded its quota of novelty, scratched a few lines on the back of the halter receipt. Received, 15 rubles. Brig St. Nicholas transferred to Marfa G. ownership inclusive of cargo pending customs inspection. He signed it. She signed with an X. The ink blotted. The deal was done. Because paperwork, even absurd paperwork, loves to become precedent. Gavril stood on the platform, suddenly aware that the rope once around his wife's neck now metaphorically encircled his own ankles. Marfa kissed his forehead. Eyewitnesses agree on this detail, though they disagree on whether it was tenderness or triumph. "Goodbye, husband," she said. "Try to make barrels that float." Then she walked down the steps, through the parting crowd and up the gangway of the brig St. Nicholas, which Bogomolov had forgotten he no longer owned. Borelli, realizing too late that the vessel itself had changed hands, sprinted after her, but the harbor master, sensing international incident, ordered the mooring lines cast off. The brig eased into the winter current, sails slack, flag drooping, like a patient old dog finally allowed to lie down. Customs records show the St. Nicholas cleared the breakwater at 1610. Port health quarantine lists note 1 passenger, female, pregnant, name withheld, destination open. The ship's log, kept by a literate boatswain whom Marfa later promoted to supercargo, begins that evening. Wind light from NNW. New proprietor instructs crew in improved cork mixture. Morale improved. No further mention of Bogomolov. He simply vanishes from maritime papers, presumably left on the dock with empty pockets and the lingering taste of someone else's cognac. Back in Odessa, newspapers ran a curt paragraph. Yesterday, a local cooper transferred his better half for the unprecedented sum of 15 silver rubles, demonstrating the continuing vitality of our municipal market. The British consul clipped the item and mailed it to London under the heading "Barbarous Survivals." The Russian governor forwarded it to St. Petersburg with a note: "Suggest discreet abolition, timing politically convenient." Within a year, the statute was repealed, the auction platform dismantled, the iron ring quietly sawn off and thrown into the harbor, where it still rusts beneath cruise ship propellers. Nothing else was done for Gavril. He fades into the debtor ledgers, last seen trading barrel hoops for drinks. Out at sea, Marfa rewrote the rules of human property one quiet afternoon at a time. She sold the cargo of undeclared cognac in Constantinople, paid the crew in silver, renamed the brig Swallow, and filed proper Ottoman papers under the surname Kazansai, cauldron maker, a private joke about her former husband's leaky vessels. By spring, she was listed as owner-master in Lloyd's Register, the first woman so entered in the Black Sea section, though the clerks politely omitted her sex, assuming it a copying error. Her child, a daughter, was born in Trebizond. The baptismal record lists the father as the sea, which the priest allowed because the sea had indeed provided. Let's drift alongside the Swallow for a moment, just long enough to watch the new caulking settle and the copper sheathing gleam. The crew speak softly, the decks are scrubbed without shouting. Marfa keeps accounts in the cabin lamplight, numbers marching like obedient geese across the page. She never learned letters, but numbers, she says, are honest even when men are not. At night, she hums lullabies half-remembered from a village on the Dniester, the melody slipping between the masts and dissolving into starlight. No halter, no auction block, no statute, only the slow creak of timber and the gentle irony of a woman who bought the ship that once carried her for sale. If your eyelids feel heavy, let them. The sea rocks onward, and we will rock with it, back toward shore, back toward other women who learned to twist rope into leverage, back toward dim harbors where laws snoozed in dusty ledgers. Breathe in, breathe out. The fog is warm, the story slow. When you wake, we'll still be here, drifting through the next quiet rebellion. The brig Swallow, formerly St. Nicholas, formerly a floating afterthought, cleared the Bosporus on a morning the color of wet pewter. No cannon saluted, no flag dipped, only a pair of cormorants flapped alongside like reluctant escorts. Martha stood aft, one hand on the tiller, the other resting on the gentle curve beneath her apron. She had in her pocket the halter receipt folded small enough to hide inside a walnut shell, the first document she ever possessed that was not a church marriage record or a tavern IOU. Ink blurred by salt air, it nonetheless declared her owner of 38 tons of pine planking, iron spikes, and 2 smugglers' secret compartments now emptied of cognac. She had no passport, no surname the law would recognize, but the receipt bore the governor's own seal. Smudged, yes, yet legible. And in the empire of paper that counted for more than blood. Customs at Constantinople asked no awkward questions. Port officials there had long ago decided that curiosity is the one commodity never worth the duty. They measured the brig, noted the new name, accepted the modest gift of a silver ruble tucked inside the sounding line's coil, and stamped, cleared, with the languid indifference of men who have seen empires rise and fall before lunch. Martha, practical as bread, used the delay to purchase 2 items, a second-hand quadrant and a notebook bound in cheap calf. The quadrant she could not yet read. Its brass limbs looked like an astrolabe having an identity crisis, but the notebook invited her. On the first page she copied, letter by trembling letter, the inscription from the halter receipt, received 15 rubles. The alphabet felt foreign under her hand, all hooks and trip wires, yet she coaxed it the way she once coaxed fires from damp kindling. When the ink pooled, she blotted it with sawdust, leaving tiny wooden freckles that still smell of pine if you hold the page to lamplight. Meanwhile, in Odessa, the original receipt should have been filed forever beneath strata of harbor dust. But paper has a sly habit of travel. The customs clerk, a junior scribe named Levka, discovered that duplicates were required after the governor's abrupt repeal of wife auctions. Someone in St. Petersburg wanted proof that the empire had tidied away its embarrassing toys. Levka, 19, consumptive, romantic, could not resist including the astonishing case, woman sells self, becomes ship owner. He copied the entire file, sealed it with wax the color of dried blood, and dispatched it north. Then, because copying is tedious and romance needs compensation, he kept the original halter receipt as a souvenir, slipping it between the pages of a French novel he had no intention of finishing. When Levka died 2 winters later, tuberculosis, predictably poetic, the novel, receipt and all, traveled to his sister in Kiev, who sold it for a kopeck to a second-hand binder. There it rested, a fleck of human lint adrift in the great coat pocket of the empire, waiting for a curious thumb. But we need not chase every scrap of paper tonight. The sea is kinder than archives. Let's stay aboard the Swallow while the wind stays polite and the Timonies creak like drowsy grandfathers. The crew, 7 in all, including the literate boatswain Demian, settled into the novelty of being paid on time. Martha instituted 2 rules, no drinking below decks, and no songs about lost love before the dog watch. Both rules were broken within a week, but softly, apologetically, the way one might crack a biscuit and brush the crumbs away. Demian taught her the quadrant by starlight, murmuring names, Rigel, Betelgeuse, the Pleiades, until the sky felt less like a ceiling and more like a map she had only misplaced. She learned to estimate latitude to within 10 nautical miles, which is close enough to avoid most rocks and most tax collectors. In early May, they put in at Trebizond. The harbor smelled of oleander and overripe figs, small boys dove for coins, coming up slick as seals. Marfa sold the last of the cognac, this time declaring it, paying duty, savoring the odd legitimacy, and with the proceeds bought a cargo of dried apricots and raw silk. Profit, she discovered, was less exhilarating than simply not being property. It felt like wearing shoes that finally fit, even if the soles were still thin. She registered her daughter's birth at the Greek Orthodox consulate, naming the infant Daria after the sea's gift. The priest, bemused by a mother who arrived in sea boots, asked for the father's name. Marfa pointed harborward, where the water merged with sky. The priest wrote, "Unknown," and in a fit of poetry added of maritime profession, thereby creating the impression that the Black Sea itself had briefly held employment papers. By autumn, the Swallow had completed a tidy circuit, Constantinople to Trebizond, Trebizond to Smyrna, Smyrna back to the mouth of the Danube. Each port left a faint layer of gossip, a woman captain, they said, pale as driftwood, who paid in silver and never smiled except at the horizon. The stories grew softer with distance, the way all sea stories do, until she became less a person than a weather phenomenon. Approach with caution, offer coffee, do not offend the wind. Marfa encouraged the vagueness. Anonymity is the one cargo that never attracts duty. Only once did she feel the past tug like an unseen current. Off Varna, a Russian naval frigate hove to, sending a boat alongside. The lieutenant, very young and very officious, demanded to see her papers. She produced the halter receipt, now reinforced with sailcloth and sealed in wax. He puzzled over the script, frowned at the governor's smudge, then shrugged. Regulations said nothing about women buying themselves, because of course they didn't. He returned to his ship, and the Swallow slipped away, leaving the frigate rocking gently, like a governess too scandalized to give chase. Winter forced her northward, toward the lower Danube, where ice forms slush thick enough to support gulls but not lawsuits. She anchored at Galati. Yes, the same Galati where wife sails had also lingered, though Romanian officials preferred to call them domestic rearrangements. There she heard the first rumor that the empire wished its embarrassing statute erased entirely. A friendly customs translator whispered over plum brandy that St. Petersburg had dispatched inspectors to confiscate every surviving document. The translator himself had seen the circular. Collect all papers pertaining to auction of spouses, especially case file 1838 Odessa 14. Marfa listened, expression flat as river ice, then paid for the brandy and walked back through snow that squeaked like new shoes. That night she sewed the halter receipt into the lining of her greatcoat, next to her heart, where the rustle sounded almost like a heartbeat. Sleep comes easily on winter rivers. The cold obliges everyone to slow down. Snow muffles footsteps, ice muffles oars, and the world feels temporarily sorry for all the noise it usually makes. Aboard the Swallow, the crew kept watch in turns, stamping softly, breathing steam into mufflers. Marfa sat below, teaching herself letters by lamplight, copying entries from D. Mayon's logbook. Moderate breeze, overcast, porpoises off the starboard bow. Porpoises, she learned, were not fish but mammals. They breathed air and yet lived in water, an arrangement that struck her as enviably balanced. She closed the notebook, pinched the wick, and let the dark settle like a blanket someone else had warmed. Outside, The river pressed against the hull, whispering promises it would keep only until thaw. If you are still awake, notice how your own breathing has slowed to match the vessel's gentle rock. Nothing is required of you. No mutiny will erupt, no cannon flash. History here is only a woman, a coat, and a rectangle of paper learning to feel like skin. When you drift off, the river will continue, indifferent and patient the way rivers are. And when you wake, we'll follow the faint trail of that paper, north to St. Petersburg, west to Vienna, wherever bureaucracy dreams its small, persistent dreams. Spring peeled the ice from the Danube, the way you might ease a dried label off a jar, slowly, with frequent shrugs of resignation. The Swallow slipped her moorings at Galati on the first day, the river clerks deemed probably not fatal, and bobbed toward the Black Sea under a sky the color of weak tea. Marfa had spent the winter rehearsing a new role, respectability. Respectability, she suspected, was less a garment than a disguise you sewed onto yourself invisibly, stitch by tiny stitch, until the law no longer recognized the original fabric. She bought a second-hand women's coat in Iashi, dark wool high collar, cut for someone who never climbed rigging, and wore it over her sailor's trousers whenever officials came aboard. D. Mayan, promoted to first mate, learned to address her as pan-captain in public and Marfa only when the horizon was empty. The crew practiced shrugging as if women captains were as common as bilge water. They were getting rather good at it. Meanwhile, in St. Petersburg, the circular of quiet erasure made its leisurely rounds. Dated 12 February 1839, it bore the innocuous title concerning archival hygiene in southern ports, a phrase that sounded like instructions for laundering handkerchiefs rather than deleting human trafficking. The Ministry of Internal Affairs requested all extant documentation relating to obsolete municipal statutes on domestic reassignment be forwarded under seal, with duplicates burned to prevent confusion. Burning, of course, was the Empire's preferred method of therapy. Nothing soothed bureaucratic embarrassment like the soft crackle of kindling. A clerk named Baron Fittingoff, third secretary, fond of pince-nez, allergic to controversy, received the Odessa bundle in April. Among the damp petitions and ink-smeared port journals he found Levka's copy, "Woman sells self, becomes ship owner." Fittingoff sniffed. Unusual, yes, but paper was paper, and instructions were explicit. He dipped his quill to endorse it for incineration. Then he paused. Barons, even minor ones, are trained to notice the scent of advantage. Fittingoff's uncle edited a thin, respectable journal titled Northern Miscellany, dedicated to improving public morals through cautious scandal. What better moral improvement than a tale of female ingenuity triumphing over provincial barbarism? Provided the names were blurred, the politics smoothed, the empire portrayed as enlightened reformer. He slipped Levka's copy into his desk drawer and sent the rest to the furnace, where it burned with the soft sigh of secrets becoming smoke. Thus the only official trace of Marfa's auction survived, because a minor baron fancied himself a literary entrepreneur. History, like loose change, often falls between sofa cushions owned by the mildly ambitious. Back on the water, Marfa felt the ripple of erasure before she knew its name. At Varna, a customs officer, newly posted, still eager, searched her papers twice, puzzled by the absence of a male master. "Where is your husband or father or owner?" he asked, the word tasting sour even to him. She produced the halter receipt, now softened by wear and smelling faintly of tar. He read it, frowned, called a superior, The superior read it, laughed, stamped, cleared. But the laugh was uneasy, the sort that wonders whether it will be quoted in a report. As the Swallow glided out, Martha noticed a second boat putting off from shore, carrying a sealed satchel toward the telegraph station. She made a mental note. The Empire was beginning to itch. The itch spread. At Sinope, a Russian frigate stopped her again, this time requesting verification of non-contraband personnel. The lieutenant, different from last year's boy, same regulations scowl, searched the hold, thumped barrels, questioned each crewman on whether Pan Capitan had ever been seen in women's dress. They answered, straight-faced, that they had seen him only in the dress of command, which was admittedly elaborate. The lieutenant departed empty-handed but dissatisfied, like a diner served soup when he expected scandal. That evening, D. Mayan showed Martha a crumpled note he had lifted from the officer's coat pocket. Case 1838, Odessa 14, possibly at large. Female. Consider discreet detention if encountered. No name, no description beyond female, as if half the population were a single slippery suspect. Martha folded the note into a paper boat and launched it over the taffrail. The current carried it eastward, a tiny vessel of anxiety set adrift. She understood then that the paperwork meant to erase her was instead propagating her, the way burning grass seed sometimes scatters on the wind. The only safe response was to become too ordinary to notice, too useful to imprison. So she embraced the dullest trade known to maritime bureaucracy, grain. Wheat, barley, maize, cargoes so respectable they induced yawns in port captains across two empires. She hauled Romanian wheat to Constantinople, Anatolian barley to Odessa, Russian rye to Smyrna, looping the triangle with the steady perseverance of a woman hemming an endless skirt. Each voyage filed the edges off her notoriety. Gossip, bored by repetition, moved on to fresher absurdities. An Albanian pirate who quoted Virgil, a Greek monk investing in roller skates. By 1841, Lloyd's Register listed Swallow as engaged in cereals and C. Master M. Kazan sigh, with no remark beyond, steady. Steady is the lullaby of commerce. It hums regulators to sleep. Yet the receipt still traveled, hidden in coat lining, too dangerous to discard, too precious to burn. Some nights she unfolded it by lamplight, tracing the X that had once been her entire signature. The shape looked like crossed sticks, like a barrier, like a door. She practiced new letters over it, writing Martha Kazansai again and again until the name felt less like costume jewelry and more like skin. D. Mayan, yawning, would find her asleep with the pen slipped between fingers, ink drying on the quilt. He'd move the candle aside, careful not to wake her, thinking, though he never said, that the greatest rebellion might be simply learning to spell yourself. In late summer 1842, the Swallow put in at Odessa for the first time since the auction. The city had paved another street, planted acacias along the embankment, installed gas lamps that hissed like cats. Martha stood on her own deck, coat buttoned high, watching dock workers unload sacks of wheat. No one glanced twice. The pale captain with the tired eyes was just another silhouette against sunrise. She felt the odd sensation of walking through her own ghost, seeing the grain exchange steps where she had once stood roped, now swept clean, innocent. A new statue of the Tsar, bronze, pompous, gazed seaward as if auditioning for eternity. She resisted the urge to salute. Statues prefer not to recognize the people they once commodified. Only one moment pricked the bubble of anonymity. An old woman selling sunflower seeds near the pier looked up, squinted, spat thoughtfully. You're her, she muttered, not a question. Martha paused. Her who? The one who bought the sea. The woman cackled, revealing 3 teeth and a lifetime of undiagnosed sarcasm. Martha bought a paper cone of seeds, paid double, walked away cracking them one by one, tasting salt and the faint iron of memory. She never saw the woman again. Perhaps she was a minor deity assigned to mark transitions, perhaps only a vendor with sharp eyes. Either way, the encounter felt like a receipt stamped by fate, transaction acknowledged, no refund. That night she visited the harbor master's archive, ostensibly to file a cargo manifest. While clerks shuffled stamps, she slipped into the stacks. The 1838 ledgers were missing, gap on the shelf like a pulled tooth, but the burn pile behind the building yielded a charred corner of halter invoice, edges curled, ink bubbled. She pocketed the fragment, a souvenir of near erasure. Later in her cabin, she sewed it alongside the original, 2 layers of the same paper now protecting each other, like scars that decide to heal together. The coat grew heavier by a gram, history's negligible but stubborn weight. We drift northwest now, up the spine of the empire, until the birch forests fold back and reveal St. Petersburg's damp grandeur. The city smells of wet plaster and freshly varnished ambition. Even the fog carries a whiff of bureaucratic aftershave. Baron Fittingoff, 3rd secretary no longer, now 2nd secretary with larger pince-nez, has spent 2 years polishing his human interest anecdote into something fit for northern miscellany. He has changed Martha's name to Marta, shifted the port to a southern backwater, and given her a tearful reunion with an imaginary peasant sweetheart. The Empire, in his version, abolishes wife selling out of enlightened benevolence rather than embarrassment, and Marta ends her days running a humble orphanage, shoes modestly downcast. It is all very improving, very printable, and very unlikely to provoke questions in high places. Fittingoff submits the manuscript in the winter of 1843 and waits for approbation to arrive on a silver tray. Instead, the censor returns it wrapped in red ribbon, meaning, "See me at once and bring explanations." The explanatory interview is brief, chilly, conducted over tea that tastes of rust. The senior censor, Countess Adlerberg, a woman whose wig is rumored to weigh more than some poodles, informs Fittingoff that tales of female self-purchase might encourage speculation on property rights generally, a slope lubricated with surf grease. Worse, the story implies municipal statutes once sanctioned human auction, which contradicts the official line that such things occurred only in foreign fairy tales. She hands the manuscript back with a smile sharp enough to slice cucumbers. "Rewrite," she suggests, "or warm your hands at the nearest stake." Barons, even ambitious ones, know when retreat is the better part of posterity. Fittingoff bows, withdraws, and decides, quietly, that if the state does not want the story, perhaps the story does not want the state. So the paper begins its second life as samizdat. He hires a Swiss compositor who owes him gambling favors, sets the type in a basement smelling of cabbage and ink, and prints 100 copies on thin gray stock that smudges at the slightest touch. The pamphlet is entitled "A Woman Buys Herself," an authentic relation, printed for the curious. No author, no printer, no price. Only a woodcut frontispiece of a woman holding a ship's wheel, hair streaming like uncombed justice. Fittingoff distributes it by the simple expedient of leaving copies in theater foyers and ladies' cloakrooms, venues where respectable censors rarely linger. Within a week, the pamphlet is being read aloud in salons, quoted in letters, smuggled to Moscow hidden inside piano scores. Censorship, like a broom, rarely reaches under every chair. Back on the Black Sea, Martha hears nothing of this. She is too busy becoming dull. Dullness, she has decided, is the shadow form of freedom. If you move predictably, no one tries to net you. Her routine settles into the maritime equivalent of plain dress: up at dawn, log at 6, soup at noon, lights out at 9. She refuses every invitation to interesting cargo. No revolutionary pamphlets, no Polish exiles, no theatrical companies fleeing creditors. Wheat, barley, salt, timber, the pallet of tedium. Even the crew grows restful. Defiance composes sea shanties so bland they can be sung in church, though nobody would bother. The Swallow becomes a ghost of commerce, visible but forgettable, like background humming. Yet paper travels faster than ships. In the autumn of 1844, a passenger boards at Burgers, Madame Adelaida Ilyinishna, minor poetess, major conversationalist, traveling to Yalta for her nerves. She spends the voyage reclining on a coil of rope, declaiming couplets to the horizon and fanning herself with a pamphlet. Defiance, polite to the point of pain, offers to store the fan in the chart room. She declines, but he glimpses the title. A Woman Buys Herself. That night he shows Martha a smudged page. She reads, slowly, lips moving, sees the name Marta, the orphanage, the tearful sweetheart, and feels something between laughter and vertigo. Someone has stitched her life into a morality coat, lining and all, without measuring the wearer. She asks to keep the page. Madam, flattered, presents the entire pamphlet as a talisman against tedium. Martha slips it next to the halter receipt, creating a sandwich of paper, one layer saying I was sold, the other I was invented, both somehow true. The encounter unsettles her more than Russian frigates or import duties. Stories are another kind of property, and hers has been stolen, pressed into service for someone else's conscience. She spends the next watches replaying every detail of the auction, worried that memory might have already bent. Had she really smiled at Bargamalov? Had Borelli's waistcoat been green or blue? The past, she realizes, is as fragile as wet pulp. Once printed, it hardens into whatever shape the press demands. To counteract distortion, she begins her own log, not of wind and weather, but of herself. She writes at night, haltingly, a sentence per day. I remember the smell of pine tar on Gavril's hands. I remember counting masts instead of prayers. The sentences accumulate like ballast, holding the vessel of memory level. By the winter of 1845, the pamphlet has slipped the empire's outer provinces entirely and fetched up in the one place irony goes to retire, the Italian port of Ancona, free trade zone, papal customs house, and unofficial rest home for plot lines too threadbare to sprint. Here lives Luca Borelli. Yes, the same Borelli who once bid 10 rubles for a pregnant woman and accidentally sold his own brig. Time has not improved him. His waistcoat is now the color of weak coffee, and his mustache droops like a plant that has given up photosynthesis. Yet he has discovered a secondary career, trafficking not cognac, but censored sentences. Print is lighter than brandy, easier to hide inside reliquaries, and, crucially, its profit margin increases the nearer it approaches a bonfire. Borelli buys confiscated pamphlets by the bale from Venetian policemen, sells them by the single sheet to English tourists who think persecution guarantees truth. He has become, in his own words, a librarian to the damned, though he still can't spell bibliography without glancing at a card. One February dusk, the Swallow glides into Ancona carrying Anatolian wheat, and more importantly, a hold stacked with blank paper, Martha's newest legitimate cargo. Blank paper is respectable. It also provides perfect camouflage for anything you might wish to print on the return trip. She has no intention of smuggling words herself, but Ancona's dark side chatter soon informs her that her very existence is already contraband. Borelli, recognizing the brig's lines, and perhaps the tilt of her captain's hat, accosts her on the quay with the air of a man meeting an old creditor who still owes him wonder. "Signora Kazansai," he exclaims. He has read the pamphlet too and relishes the melodrama of names. Imagine! The woman, the myth, the walking allegory. Martha, who has rehearsed indifference the way other people practice scales, offers a nod no warmer than a February stone. But Borelli possesses one thing she needs: a press, small, portable, currently hidden in a disused olive mill outside the city walls. He also possesses, more surprisingly, repentance, thin, watery, but real as low tide. He has, he confesses, spent 7 years trying to forget the afternoon he tried to buy her. The memory keeps resurfacing like a cork soaked in guilt. He wishes, if she permits, to print her real account before the myth grows feathers and flies away cackling. Repentance, like smuggling, is best handled cautiously. Martha demands proof. She wants to see the press, the type, the ink. Borelli, delighted to prolong the intrigue, leads her through alleyways that smell of fish and incense, up a staircase that creaks like an elderly sermon, into a round room where a wooden press stands bathed in lamplight. Types are arranged in a tray labeled Greek Italic 10 PT, though half the letters are missing and the other half are drunk. Still, the machine functions. Borelli pulls a lever, produces a test line. In the year of our inconvenience, 1838. Martha runs her finger over the impression. The ridges feel honest, like scar tissue. She agrees to dictate, but on 3 conditions: no orphanages, no imaginary sweethearts, and the pamphlet must end with the halter receipt reproduced verbatim. Ink for ink. X for X. Borelli, who has never before been asked to print something less sensational than the truth, swears on the relic of Saint Spiridon that he will comply. They spit on palms, shake. The deal smells of salt and old olives. For the next week she rises before dawn, walks the misty lanes, dictates 2 pages at a time while Borelli's compositor, a Neapolitan anarchist named Alfonso, sets type with ink-black fingers. She speaks plainly, sentence by patient sentence, the smell of pine tar, the counting of masts, the moment she realized numbers could be allies. No moral, no swelling violins, just the slow accretion of days. When she reaches the auction itself, her voice steadies, slows, the way one might describe a dream that has ceased to frighten. Alfonso, hardened by years of revolutionary lament, finds himself blinking more than usual. Borelli, listening from the doorway, discovers that unvarnished truth contains a narcotic more potent than contraband brandy. It makes the room feel suddenly larger, as if walls had inhaled. Yet even repentance cannot resist a garnish. Borelli, unable to help himself, adds a short preface. To the reader, may this tale remind us that commerce in flesh is but the shadow of commerce in conscience. Martha reads it, considers objection, decides the sentence is harmless. Shadows, after all, are what lullabies are made of. They print 200 copies on the blank paper she has hauled, each page water-marked with a tiny swallow in flight, her first and only vanity. The pamphlet is entitled Receipt for Myself, a plain relation, price 1 groschen, or equivalent in bread. Borelli plans to distribute at Easter Fair, when pilgrims swarm the port and censorship officers are distracted by communion wafer logistics. But paper, once loosened, prefers to schedule its own debut. On the night the pamphlets are stacked ready, a squad of papal gendarmes raids the olive mill. Someone has informed, perhaps a rival smuggler, perhaps the devil making room for new gossip. Borelli, Alfonso, and 2 apprentices are hauled away, leaving the press broken and the pamphlets scattered like startled pigeons. Marfa, who has developed an instinct for official feet on staircases, escapes through a trapdoor leading into the olive grove, coat stuffed with as many copies as it can hold. She spends the dark hours crouched between ancient trunks, listening to boots, owls, and the soft thump of her own pulse. By dawn, the gendarmes have gone. The press is confiscated, Borelli jailed for corrupting public order and possibly the Latin language. She alone remains, coat bulging with contraband truth, wondering whether dissemination is worth the inevitable sore feet. She decides on the quietest possible terrorism, leave the truth where tired people might sit on it. Over the next month, she scatters pamphlets like breadcrumbs, one tucked under the candle in a monastery pew, another slipped between the leaves of a missal in a convent refectory, a third left on the harbor bench where customs officers eat lunch. No speeches, no signatures, just the invitation to read, pass along, forget the messenger. Some copies are found, read, re-hidden. Others become wrapping for fried fish, fulfilling Borelli's prediction that all printed matter eventually faces digestion. One, however, travels north in the carpetbag of an English governess, Miss Cordelia Hesketh, bound for Odessa to teach the daughters of the British consul. Miss Hesketh, prim as starch, discovers the pamphlet during a storm in the Adriatic. The cabin boy, seasick, has used it to steady a teacup. She raids, is unexpectedly moved, slips it into her journal as a curiosity of foreign manners. Thus Marfa's words acquire a first-class berth and a governess's accent, the sort that convinces customs men they have already inspected something when they have merely been greeted in crisp English. By spring 1846, the Swallow is again a grain carrier, outwardly unchanged. Marfa has sewn the last remaining pamphlet pages into the hem of her cabin curtain, where they rustle like restless mice when the wind shifts. Borelli languishes in Ancona's prison, composing odes to liberty and occasionally to Marfa, whom he now calls the accountant of my conscience. She sends him dried apricots and a quadrant, items she considers essential to moral navigation. He receives them, weeps, trades the quadrant for ink, and writes more bad poetry. The world, as usual, continues not noticing small generosities, but the apricots taste like forgiveness, and that is probably enough. The island of Sveti Nikola sits 7 miles off the Danube Delta, a low sandbar wearing a fringe of reeds and the melancholy honor of being everyone's last stop before, somewhere else. In 1846, the Russian Sanitary Commission declares it a quarantine station for grain ships inbound from the Levant. Too many fleas, too many rumors of plague. Vessels anchor in the outer roadstead, lower boats, submit papers and wait. Crews spend 3 to 6 days in wooden barracks where the wind sings through cracks like a bored child with a flute. The Swallow arrives in late May, holds fragrant with wheat, bilges sweet with ballast water. Marfa steps ashore carrying the usual bundle, logbook, coat, curtain hem full of contraband sentences. She expects tedium. Instead, she meets insomnia in human form. His name is Pavel Rudko, night archivist of the quarantine station, a man who has not slept properly since a bout of childhood fever left him permanently awake. Medical texts call it morbus vigilantiae. Darkhands call him the candle. At any hour you may see his lantern bobbing along the pier while he inventories crates, counts rats, or measures the humidity of fog. He is pale, soft-voiced, eyes red-rimmed as if he has been crying over dictionaries. His job is to copy every document that passes through the station. Bill of health, bill of lading's second thoughts. Then forward duplicates to Odessa, keeping triplicates in case the sea swallows originals or vice versa. 7 years of paperwork lean in shelves that smell of mildew and resignation. Rudko remembers everything he has ever copied, which means he remembers nothing of dreams. He has become a living archive, wide-eyed and gently cracked. Martha presents her papers, standard forms, respectable cargo, respectable destination. Rudko scans, nods, then pauses at the coat hem which has chosen that exact moment to release a single pamphlet page. It flutters to the planks like a tired moth. He picks it up, reads under lamplight, and so I stepped off the platform owning the vessel that had carried me for sail. His eyebrows rise, a slow, creaking motion seldom required in sanitary paperwork. "Is this your composition?" he asks, voice soft as dust. Martha considers denial, decides fatigue is simpler. "It is my life, copied without permission." Rudko nods as if acknowledging a fellow insomniac. "Lives should be filed alphabetically," he murmurs, "but yours keeps changing spelling." He invites her to the archive hut, a shed perched on pilings like a heron that has misplaced its wings. Inside, shelves grown under bundles tied with ribbon the color of old bruises. He offers tea that tastes of river water and ink. She accepts, because politeness costs less than bribes. Between sips, he confesses his hobby, clandestine preservation. Whenever a document seems likely to be lost in the next directive, he copies it twice. Once for the Empire, once for the shelf labeled miscellaneous curiosities, possibly useful to someone. The shelf contains plague decrees, love letters confiscated for excessive postage, a recipe for rat poison in Church Slavonic, and now, he hopes, her plain relation. He would like to file the entire pamphlet. In exchange, he offers safekeeping of the original halter receipt, which he senses she carries like a steadily beating second heart. The quarantine station, he points out, is technically extraterritorial. Papers stored here exist in a gentle limbo, neither officially alive nor formally dead. Martha, amused by the metaphor, agrees. She produces the receipt, now translucent along its creases, and watches him place it in a canvas folder marked K. Misk. He copies the text in his impeccable clerk hand, numbering every line, signing the margin with a tiny asterisk that means witnessed by night. Thus the document enters its third incarnation, rope, paper, and now calligraphy, each layer further from the neck, closer to the shelf. But paperwork, once invited, likes to bring friends. 2 nights later, Rudko rouses her at midnight. A dispatch cutter has arrived carrying sealed orders. The envelope contains a circular identical to the one seen in Galati, only fresher, crisper, smelling of urgent wax. Case 1838 Odessa 14, alias woman who bought herself, still at large, all stations to report sightings, detain if feasible, silence publicity. Rudko's face, usually the color of candle drippings, seems even paler. "I cannot detain you," he whispers, "but I cannot file you under ignored directives either. The shelf collapsed last winter under the weight of my conscience." Martha considers the options: flee and confirm suspicion, stay and risk enclosure. She chooses a third route: boredom. Boredom, she has learned, is the Empire's second favorite drug after vodka. Administered correctly, it induces paralysis of curiosity. Over the next 5 days, she follows quarantine routine with theatrical precision. She scrubs decks at dawn, submits to flea inspection at noon, attends the nightly reading of sanitary regulations. Rudko's voice a monotony designed to anoint even insomnia with drowsiness. Crew and guards slump yawn, forget to watch the one woman officially labeled interesting. On the sixth day, the station doctor, an elderly Swede who believes fresh air cures everything except fresh air, declares the swallow healthy. The yellow flag descends, the green flag rises, the brig is free to proceed. Rudko hands her a folded sheet, not permission to sail, but a certified copy of her own receipt, freshly sealed with the quarantine stamp that reads examined and found non-contagious. The irony drifts between them like incense. "Keep the original," he says. "I now possess the dream version." They shake hands, two archivists of insomnia, trading lullabies of evidence. As the Swallow drifts past the breakwater, Rudko stands on the pier holding his lantern, a single unmoving star in the pre-dawn haze. He has not slept, but for the first time he feels the soft tug of someone else's dream pulling at the edges of his wakefulness. Behind him, the shelf labeled K. Misk holds a new folder. Inside, the halter receipt begins to yellow gently, absorbing the scent of salt, ink, and the faint medicinal odor of quarantine. Years from now, clerks will stumble across it, puzzle over the asterisk, wonder why a rope receipt shares space with plague decrees. By then, the paper will be too fragile to unfold. It will be read only by lamplight and held by edges, the way one handles a memory that still remembers you. Aboard ship, Martha stores the certified copy in the logbook, next to her nightly sentence practice. The page smells of carbolic acid and release. She writes a new line. Insomnia is just another port. Drop anchor, wait for tide. Then she closes the book, pinches the wick, and lets the vessel glide into the dark that precedes every map. Summer 1847 finds the Swallow shuttling between Trebizond and Odessa, with the dedication of a bead threading the same necklace over and over. The holds carry wheat, the logbook carries Martha's nightly sentences, and the horizon carries rumors that travel faster than any hull. In every port, someone asks, slyly or sideways, about the woman who bought herself. The story has grown elbows. They say she freed 100 serfs, that she navigates by witch fire, that she keeps the halter rope coiled like a pet serpent in her cabin. Each retelling adds another pearl of absurdity until the original grain, an illiterate woman with 15 rubles and a sharp sense of leverage, disappears inside the knacker. Martha listens, expression flat as unleavened bread, and files the variants under whether squally, non-threatening. She has discovered that myths, like gulls, follow any plow that disturbs the surface. The trick is to keep plowing straight and let them screech. Yet even the dullest course must occasionally tack. In July, the Russian Grain Consortium offers a bonus rate for cargo to Bristol. England's mills are hungry, America's harvest late, prophet smells of damp English band notes. The voyage means rounding the Peloponnese, threading the Strait of Otranto, braving the Bay of Biscay, waters famous for swallowing ships larger than 38 tons of pine plank. The crew, lulled by years of serial tranquility, mutter about curses, sea serpents, and the price of courage. Martha calculates the bonus would buy new sails, pay off the last of Bargamalov's phantom debts, and though she barely admits it, might fund a small house somewhere tides argue less loudly. She agrees to go, but only after installing a second-hand pump, fresh storm canvas, and a figurehead carved from beechwood, a swallow with folded wings, eyes closed, beak tucked, an icon of drowsy persistence. They launch on the first day of August under a sky the color of tarnished pewter, Even the gulls seem too lethargic to bid farewell. The wheat behaves. No spontaneous fermentation, no philosophical objections to being ballast. The myth, however, refuses to stay ashore. Off Zakynthos, a British mail bracket hails them. The captain, a pink-cheeked commander named Penrose, boards with a portfolio of regulations and a head full of dockside tales. He has heard of a female slaver captain who freed herself by purchasing her own carcass, and wonders if this might be she. Martha presents her papers, Master M. Kazansai, grain in bulk, destination Bristol, nothing to declare but boredom. Penrose, disappointed by the ordinariness, nevertheless asks for her autograph, for the missus, who collects curiosities. Martha signs with a plain M, the cross stroke minimal, the down stroke reluctant. Penrose pockets it, unaware he carries away the first sample of her handwriting ever to reach England, an X that finally learned to behave like a letter. The encounter lasts 20 minutes, costs her a bottle of plum brandy as hospitality, and adds another feather to the myth. She drinks captains under the table and signs her name in fire. Martha logs the meeting as wind moderate, Englishman talkative, and forgets it before the ink dries. The Atlantic, however, has not forgotten its reputation. Off Cape Finisterre, the sky gathers purple bruises. Barometer falls like a stone with social anxiety. For 3 days the Swallow labors in steep seas, wheat sacks shifting like tectonic plates below decks. D-Mine sprains a wrist, 2 men bruise ribs, and the new figurehead loses its beak to an enthusiastic wave. Martha stands at the helm, coat plastered to thighs, repeating multiplication tables under her breath. 6 8s 48, 7 8s 56 arithmetic as ballast against panic. On the 4th morning, the wind tires of its own tantrum and subsides into a drizzle so soft it feels like apology. They limp toward Bristol with torn sails but intact wheat, myth newly embroidered. She outstared the Biscay beast and the beast blinked. Martha writes in the log, storm past, crew alive, wheat slightly seasick, then sleeps 14 hours straight, coat still on, boots still dripping, dreaming of nothing, her first luxury in years. Bristol docks greet them with the smell of coal smoke and damp stone, a perfume of industry that makes even wheat feel prosaic. The harbour master, accustomed to Yankee clippers and Welsh coal brigs, eyes the stubby grain carrier and its quiet captain with the suspicion reserved for anything that arrives without fanfare. Paperwork, however, is British and therefore solvable by tea. While the crew unloads, Martha strolls the quay, coat lighter now. She has sold half the wheat futures on the spot, pocketing band notes that crinkle like autumn leaves. In a bookstall near the Custom House, she discovers an English translation of Northern Miscellany, open to a page headed A Russian Martyr to Matrimonial Barbarism. The tale is Fittingoff's old confection, further sugared. Martha now ends her days teaching lace-making to orphans while pining for the steps. Martha buys the volume for £1, intending laughter, but the laughter sticks in her throat like dry bread. Even here, across 2 seas and a continent, someone else is sleeping inside her skin. That night she walks Queen Square, listening to gas lights hiss and boots click over cobbles. A woman passes, arm linked in a man's, face obscured by bonnet ribbons. The man is explaining loudly that the Russian heroine refused freedom until every serf was liberated. The woman murmurs admiration. Martha considers correcting them, decides the truth would sound like pedantry, and keeps walking. She feels the myth brushing past her in the fog, close enough to snag her coat, loose enough to swallow strangers. Back in her in-room, she cuts the English page from the miscellany, folds it small, and sews it into the curtain hem alongside the remaining pamphlet leaves. Now the hem contains 3 strata: original Russian truth, Baron's embroidered truth, English re-embroidered truth, geology of narrative, each layer pressing the one below flatter, thinner, closer to farcical. The return voyage is uneventful, winds cooperative, wheat sacks disciplined, gulls polite. They deliver the remainder in Odessa, collect the bonus, replace storm canvas, mend figurehead with a new beak carved to look slightly open, as if mid-yawn. Marfa pays the crew a premium and herself a night's silence. In the log she writes, "Completed circle, myth still circling overhead like albatross with excellent stamina." Then she closes the book, stretches until her shoulders creak, and realizes she has not been anyone's property for 8 full years. The thought arrives quietly, without fireworks, the way dawn slips a sliver of light under a cabin door. She allows herself one small smile, tiny, private, gone before it reaches the corners of her mouth. No one witnesses it. That, too, is a kind of ownership. Autumn 1848 smells of crushed grapes and unhurried rain. The Swallow lies at anchor off the Dniester mouth, rigging slack, crew paid off, wheat futures converted into a single canvas sack of silver coins that clink softly as breathing. Marfa steps onto a wooden jetty that someone forgot to finish building. Half its planks wander into reeds and stop, as though the carpenter lost interest mid-thought. She has come inland carrying only the coat, the logbook, and a letter from the Odessa land office, an offer to purchase a small orchard outside the village of Usertow, 40 apple trees, a well of indifferent temper, a cottage that leans like an elderly drunk. The price is exactly the bonus earned by sailing wheat to England and myth back to Russia. She signs as M. Kazansai. The clerk glances at the trousers, the coat, the calm in her eyes, and decides curiosity is above his pay grade. Thus the woman once sold with a rope becomes the owner of earth that grows rope's ancestral cousin, flax. Because of course it does. The cottage greets her with the aroma of mouse-chewed thatch and decades of smoke that never quite learn the way out. Wind prowls through gaps in the walls, whistling minor thirds. She spends the first night seated on her single sea chest, coat wrapped round like a ship in a storm, listening to apples drop in the dark, dull thuds, irregular as afterthoughts. Each fall feels like someone dropping coins into a purse she cannot open. In the morning, she patches the roof with spare canvas, caulks window cracks with tow, and hangs the halter receipt above the hearth. No frame, just a nail driven into crumbling plaster. The paper flutters whenever the door sighs, a ghost practicing departure. She finds herself speaking to it softly, the way sailors speak to compasses, steady. The word tastes of tar and lullaby. Village life moves at the speed of dough rising. Women watch from doorways, men tip hats, children ask whether she is a widow or a witch. She answers neither in a tone that suggests both. She hires no labor but barters, apples for black bread, paraffin for onions, silence for silence. The well, true to reputation, offers water 1 bucket at a time, then sulks. She coaxes it with patience learned from pumps at sea. Autumn ends with the orchard stripped, fruit packed into barrels she once would have filled with cognac. Apples roll like pale planets. She resists the urge to navigate them. Instead, she records yields in the logbook next to storm latitudes, creating the oddest farmer's almanac ever penned. Numbers, at last, belong to no one but her. Winter arrives sideways, wind off the steppe carrying snow that feels sifted through someone else's life. She weaves flax into coarse cloth, teaches herself to use a spindle the way she once learned the quadrant, slowly, muttering calculations. Each thread feels like a sentence in a story no one will read aloud. On feast days, she walks to church, stands at the back, lets incense settle on her coat like another layer of forgetting. The priest, young and earnest, preaches on the sin of trading human souls. She listens without flinching, as though the topic is crop rotation. Afterward, he asks her name for the parish ledger. Martha Kazansai, she replies. He writes it, never guessing he has inscribed a miracle in lowercase. Because of course he hasn't. Spring surprises the orchard first. Buds appear overnight, tight as secret messages. She prunes trees the way she once trimmed sails. Remove what drags, keep what lifts. The cut branches smell faintly of ocean pine. Memory is a scent that travels without passport. A stray cat adopts her, a grey creature with one ear and no voice. She calls him mute, feeds him apple core and silence. He sleeps on the sea chest, paws twitching through dreams of rigging. Some nights she wakes to find him staring at the fluttering receipt, as if reading footnotes only cats can see. She joins him, and together they watch the paper remember wind. Yet the world, even when you leave it, sends small invoices. In May 1850, a stranger arrives, Levka's sister, Yevdokia, now grown stooped, eyes bright with grievance. She carries the French novel inside which the original halter receipt once nestled, its spine cracked, pages foxed. The receipt itself is gone. She sold it years ago to a collector of curious colonial relics, but guilt, like damp, has bloomed. She has come to return the empty book, hoping absolution is cheaper than restitution. Martha accepts the volume, offers tea, listens to the story of how the collector paid in gold, how Yevdokia bought a cow, how the cow died. When the woman pauses for breath, Martha opens the novel, finds the rectangular ghost of absent paper, and slips inside it the certified copy Rudko once gave her, quarantine stamp and all. She hands it back. "A page for a page," she says. Yevdokia leaves bewildered but lighter, clutching a book that now contains two absences mirroring one another. Because of course it does. Summer brings a letter addressed to the proprietress, Apple Orchard, Usertoe. Inside is a newspaper clipping, an English court report describing a libel case brought by Miss Cordelia Hesketh against Northern Miscellany. Miss Hesketh, it seems, circulated receipt for myself among Bristol drawing rooms. The editors sued her for defaming their earlier confection. The judge, amused, read both versions aloud in court, declared truth, no libel to fiction, fined the magazine a shilling, and recommended the governess for a pension. The clipping is wrapped in a note. Your words have travelled further than you and behaved better. CH. Martha folds both into the logbook, next to Apple Yields. Myth has become Exhibit A. She feels the peculiar pride of a shepherd whose stray sheep now grazes in someone else's parable. Years settle like sediment. Apple seasons rotate, bloom, drop, rot, rest. The receipt above the hearth yellows to the color of old bone, letters thinning toward transparency. Mute the cat ages into a cushion of fur and bones, deaf to all but the vibration of apples falling. Martha's hair grays in quiet streaks, the way frost creeps up a window pane. She learns to make cider that tastes of smoke and patience. Villagers begin to seek her out on winter evenings, accepting silence poured in earthenware. Children who once asked if she was a witch now bring grandchildren for stories. She tells them about constellations, never about halters. The orchard grows orderly, trees spaced like well-mannered congregation. She keeps a single wildling sapling at the edge, pruned only by wind, because something should remain ungoverned. One October dusk, While gathering the last windfalls, she hears a carriage stop on the lane. A young man steps down, ink-stained fingers, spectacles, the hesitant energy of someone who has spent life indoors chasing other people's sentences. He introduces himself as Junior Archivist, Imperial Maritime Museum, recently founded at Nikolaev. The museum, he explains, seeks artifacts of transition moments in mercantile law. He has traced the halter receipt through quarantine files, Odessa customs gaps, collector sales, and now stands before the only remaining primary source, her. Would she consider donating the original to national memory? He speaks softly, as though addressing a skittish colt, and offers a pension in exchange. Marfa studies him, really studies, the tremor of idealism in his collar, the way his boots do not yet fit. Then she leads him inside, lifts the fluttering relic from its nail and hands it over. He reaches. She does not yet release. "Promise me," she says, voice rough from disuse, "you will file it under obsolete, not under heroic." He nods, earnest, probably lying. She lets go. The paper leaves her fingers with the soft sound of a sigh, or maybe that is only the door breathing. That night the hearth looks unnaturally empty. She sits, cider in hand, mute in lap, and tries to feel lighter. Instead, she feels porous, as though the document were a plug keeping her memories from draining. She opens the logbook, writes the last sentence she will ever record. "Gave away the rope that held me, kept the slack." Then she closes the book, places it in the sea chest, and shuts the lid. Outside, apples continue their small thuds against earth, counting a currency that needs no receipt. Morning in Usertow, 1854. The receipt is gone, but the nail remains, a small iron comma punctuating blank plaster. Marfa finds herself staring at it longer each dawn, as though expecting the paper to respawn like mildew. It does not. What grows instead is a quiet ring of shadow around the nail, smoke, dust, time, an inadvertent halo. She begins to understand that absence can occupy space more stubbornly than presence. It asks questions without pronouns. Mute the cat, now deaf entirely, sleeps beneath the halo, as under a tiny private eclipse. Village life, once slow as rising dough, has quickened slightly. The Crimean War drifts overhead like distant thunder that forgets to rain. Soldiers pass on the road, boots creaking, gossip trailing. They speak of Sevastopol, of Florence Nightingale, of the British fleet prowling the Black Sea like polite wolves. No one connects the grey-haired apple grower to naval legend. Myths lose interest in women who prune trees. Yet supply needs grain. Grain needs hulls. Hulls need stories to keep crews from counting waves and despair. One October dusk, a staff captain of the Sea of Azov flotilla appears at her gate, epaulets dulled by road dust. He carries requisition papers and a look of embarrassed necessity. The Empire needs every seaworthy craft, even 38-ton yawls that smell of apples and old revolutions. Marfa reads the order, offers tea, and names a price that could buy a small cathedral. The captain, expecting pleas, blinks twice, accepts. Because of course he does. So the Swallow is pressed into service, not as warship, but as transport, flour, lentils, bandages, once a cargo of lime trees intended to freshen Sevastopol's trenches. Marfa accompanies her, unwilling to trust even the Empire with her second skin. The logbook reopens. The first wartime entry reads, "Freight, humanitarian destination, siege." She signs, "M. Kazansai, master," and feels the old tiller fit her palm like a sentence she never finished. crew is naval conscripts plus D-Mayan, lured out of retirement by nostalgia and the promise of English tobacco. They sail at dawn under a merchant ensign, painted over with the diagonal white stripe of auxiliary. The orchard stays behind, tended by a widowed neighbor who believes trees prefer women without watches. Wartime water is a different element. Every horizon carries a plume. Every sail might be hospital or hazard. At Kerch, they take aboard wounded, boys with eyes older than apples. Martha learns to stack stretchers between bulkheads the way she once nested barrels, calculating weight and give. Surgeons operate by lamplight below decks. Chloroform smells sweet, like overripe pears. She stands watches, dictates courses, and at night writes one spare sentence. Today the sea borrowed voices, returned none. The myth, dormant for years, wakes and feeds. Sailors swear the apple captain brings luck. No patient dies on her deck, though many depart elsewhere. She overhears a mate telling newcomers that her figurehead was carved from the tree of knowledge. She neither confirms nor denies, discovering that silence in war is just another shade of camouflage. In May 1855, the Swallow is ordered to Balaclava with a cargo of lime juice and opium. Off Cape Cursones, they meet a British patrol, 2 gunboats, flags crisp as fresh disdain. Boarding officer, very young, very pink, scans papers, notes the captain's name and pauses. "Kazansai, aren't you the chap who?" he begins, then recalls courtesy and stops. Martha waits. The officer clears his throat, lowers his voice. "My aunt in Bristol has a pamphlet about you. She sent copies to the fleet. Rather ripping tale." Behind him, Marines stand, rifles reversed, trying not to stare at the woman who, according to fleet gossip, outbid the sea itself. Martha feels the myth press against her cheek like a cold metal. She offers the officer a bottle of cider. He accepts, salutes, and lets them pass. War simplifies everything, even legend. Shared liquor outweighs shared ideology. As the gunboats recede, D-Mayan mutters, "Even enemies collect your postcards." She shrugs. The tiller feels steady, the horizon still hungry. Siege duties blur, shuttle runs, typhoid quarantines, nights spent listening to mortar thuds rolling across water like distant drums made of wet wool. One dawn, a shell fragment slices the mainstay. The mast lurches, figurehead splinters. Martha rigs a jury mast from spare spars, works through darkness while the deck tilts under red flare light. A young ensign, fevered, keeps repeating, hold fast," until the words become lullaby. When the mast stands again, she is trembling, not from fear but from the intimacy of necessity, ship, crew, wheat, war, all hanging by a rope she once wore as jewelry. She writes, "Today I bought myself again, price 1 stay, 1 beak, no tears." The sentence feels sufficient. Winter brings peace, or at least exhaustion masked as peace. The Swallow is decommissioned in Sevastopol, hull scarred, deck stained, but still sound. The naval paymaster offers to purchase her outright. Martha declines, accepting only repairs and a tow back to the Dniester. She signs the transfer of service papers with the same X that once signed her sail, but now the cross stands upright, unafraid. Demolition crews ashore are turning fortifications into rubble that looks eerily like the orchard's first wild spring buds. Same pale limestone, same random scatter. She pockets a shard no larger than an apple seed, another keepsake, another layer. March 1856, the Swallow drops anchor off Usertow under a sky scrubbed clean by treaty. The orchard is waiting, older, wiser, branches holding their breath. Mute the cat, ancient, skeletal, staggers out to meet her, rubs once against her boot and dies on the threshold, content to have outlived every version of her leaving. She buries him beneath the wildling sapling, plants the limestone shard on top. Because of course she does. That night she opens the sea chest, takes out the logbook, and writes the final line. Returned with nothing but slack, found it enough. Then she carries the book to the hearth, feeds it page by page to the flames. Paper curls, ink blisters, wheat prices, and storm latitudes ascend the chimney as pale moths of ash. The cover, stubborn, stays whole. She lets it cool, places the warm cardboard cover at the foot of the empty nail. A placeholder for a story that has decided to live elsewhere. If you are drifting off, drift now. The fire settles, the orchard exhales, the house creaks itself to sleep. Ownership ends where need ends. The rest is just acreage. Breathe with the faint sweetness of burnt paper and apple wood. Let the slack gather around you like a blanket someone once thought was a halter. When you wake, we will be beyond ships, beyond sails, in the small museum where a single sheet of paper waits under glass, learning to keep still. The Nikolaev Imperial Maritime Museum opened its doors in 1860. 4 low rooms in a converted powder magazine. Walls 2 meters thick, windows the size of modest apologies. Officially, it celebrated Russian naval valor. Unofficially, it stored everything the Navy did not know what to do with: cracked figureheads, retired rudders, medals of admirals later found to be part-time frauds. In room Roman 3, under a skylight that leaks a polite drizzle, stands a single glass case labeled Auxiliary Shipping, Miscellaneous Curiosities. Inside lies a sheet of paper, brown and soft as fallen beech leaves. The label reads, Document attesting to innovative manumission practices, Black Sea 1838. Donated 1856, anon. No name, no halter, no price. Paper and glass have entered an agreement to forget noise and remember fiber. The junior archivist who negotiated the donation, same ink-stained fingers now promoted to senior, visits the case every Monday morning. He polishes the glass, adjusts the humidity card, and sometimes whispers, still steady. The paper does not answer, but the asterisk inked in its margin, Rudko's ancient witness, seems under certain angles to nod. Visitors pass, glance, move on to flashier relics, Nelson's tow line fragment, a Turkish banner with a suspiciously fresh hole. Only children pause long enough to read the full text, lips moving over words they barely understand. Received, 15 rubles ownership inclusive of cargo. They leave with the faint sense that sentences can be ships, that someone once paid to become the captain of herself. Because of course they do. Years later, like varnish, 1861. The emancipation of serfs, empire congratulating itself on discovering what Marfa had practiced privately. 1863. Another Polish uprising, pamphlets smuggled in flour barrels, the museum's basement quietly accepting another crate of miscellaneous. 1866. Someone attempts to catalogue the document properly, suggests filing under abolition precedents. Higher authority decides auxiliary shipping is safer, politics prefers anchors to allegories. The paper stays put, drinking filtered light, shrinking a millimeter per decade, content. Meanwhile, the orchard continues its unreported history. Apples bloom, apples fall, Marfa's hair turns the color of late-season bark. She no longer sails, but sometimes walks the riverbank at dusk, coat over arm, listening for hulls creaking in the dark. She has begun to teach numbers to village girls. No rhetoric, just multiplication, division, the quiet grammar of self-counting. They sit on stumps, chant tables, cheeks reddened by wind and possibility. One girl, Halina, freckled fierce, asks why the teacher never married. Martha replies, "I was auctioned early. The bid is still running." The girls laugh, uncertain, and return to their 6 times, because of course they do. In 1874, the museum commissions a new catalogue, ambitious, bilingual, indexed. The young scholar assigned to room Roman 3 is Sophia Rudko, grand niece of the sleepless archivist, now deceased. She carries his eyes, red ear-eyes from chronic wakefulness, and his habit of talking to documents. When she opens the case, she recognizes the asterisk, remembers bedtime stories of a woman who bought herself and a quarantine island that filed her under K. She photographs the sheet with the new magnesium flash. Light so sudden the paper seems to flinch. In her notes she writes, "Document constitutes legal paradox, bill of sale where buyer and merchandise coincide. Recommend transfer to civil rights section. Recommendation denied." The paper remains shipping curiosity, but Sophia quietly adds a cross-reference card. See also, personal liberty, precedents, unofficial. The card is slipped into the drawer labeled future, a place every archive keeps for ideas its present is not yet brave enough to house. Word, however, leaks. A law student in Kiev reads Sophia's article in a provincial journal, cites the document in a seminar on pre-emancipation self-manumission instruments. The professor, amused, invites him to read the text aloud. When he reaches the X mark next to Martha G., the classroom laughs, until the student points out that the X is identical to the sign manual of millions who cannot write their names. Silence settles, heavy as unread books, because of course it does. By 1880, the sheet begins to tear along ancient fold lines. Conservators suggest acidification. Finance suggests frugality. Compromise, a silk backing, stitched with hair-fine thread, color matched to insomnia. Sophia volunteers her own hair, ash-brown, strong. Under lamplight she sews, whispering, "Hold together, we are both marginalia." When finished, the paper lies smoother, supported by strands once rooted in her own scalp. Document and custodian have entered a symbiosis rare in museums, each keeping the other awake. In the orchard, Martha, now 70, prunes the wildling sapling one last time. Her knees protest, but the saw sings. She finds a branch grown into the shape of an imperfect halter, twisted, then straightened by wind. She cuts it free, sands it, hangs it from the same nail that once held paper. Wood meets absence fits, because of course it does. One summer dusk, Helena, no longer a girl but a student teacher, brings news. A museum in a distant city displays a paper that might be hers. Martha listens, expression soft as cider sediment. She neither confirms nor denies, but that night she opens the sea chest, removes the cardboard cover of the burned logbook, and places inside it a dried apple core, the limestone shard, and a new page on which she writes a single X, large, deliberate, unashamed. She closes the lid, walks to the river, and drops the chest into the current. It sinks without ceremony, a private archive returning to liquid filing system. She watches until moonlight reassembles on the surface, then walks home, coat over arm, never once looking back. Because of course she doesn't. The cottage is quieter than absence itself. Even the mice have grown considerate. Martha, 82, moves from bed to hearth in small, deliberate arcs, feet measuring the last familiar latitude of floorboards. The apple wood is almost out. She saves one chip, places it in her apron pocket like a tiny promise to stay warm somewhere else. Outside, frost has silvered the orchard into a fleet of ghost ships, branches rigged with ice. She wraps the coat around her, still the same, patches on patches, smelling of river fog and very distant storms, and sits beneath the empty nail. From this angle, the halo of shadow looks like a moon that forgot to set. She closes her eyes, not to sleep left years ago, but to listen, for apples dropping, for Mute's phantom purr, for the soft clink of coins that once sounded like breathing. Nothing arrives but the hush that lives after all stories have gone home. Downriver, the museum's skylight has finally surrendered. A slow leak drips onto the glass case, bead by bead, like a metronome keeping time for no musician. Sophia Rudko, now chief archivist, finds the first watermark on the silk backing, an island of pale spreading into the ocean of brown paper. She moves the case, orders repairs, and while the carpenter hammers, she lifts the document free, lays it on felt, and discovers something the camera never caught. On the reverse, in mirror writing faded to a bruise, the phrase, "slack is enough." She reads it aloud, feels the sentence slip into her bloodstream like warm tea. That night she writes a note. Document requests retirement from display. Recommend climate-controlled rest. The committee, weary of leaks, agrees, because of course they do. A week later, the paper is transferred to a custom box, acid freeboard cotton ribbon, a label that reads only K01, closed file. Sophia ties the ribbon, whispers, "Sleep," and realizes she has not uttered that word to anything in years. She places the box in the deepest vault, behind crates of obsolete ensigns, where darkness smells of salt and the faint vanilla of old glue. The vault door sighs shut, metal on metal, a sound very like a logbook closing. Somewhere inside the X that once signed a sale signs off. Back in Usato, spring rehearses its entrance. Ice loosens, branches shrug, buds appear like audience members arriving late but determined. Halina, now the schoolmistress, finds Martha at the table, head resting on forearms, coat collar still turned up against a cold that has moved elsewhere. The room is still, yet humming with the gentle static of a story that has finished telling itself. Halina touches the wrist, feels the last warmth preparing to leave, and understands she has been handed not a corpse but an epilogue, because of course she does. They bury her beneath the wildling apple, next to Mute and the limestone shard. No priest, only numbers. Halina recites the 6 times table aloud. 6 ones are 6, 6 twos are 12, up to 6 12s are 72, the final multiplication Martha ever taught. The children join, voices soft as petal fall. When they reach 72, the coffin is lowered. Earth folds over, smooth and quiet as a page turned. Halina places the last object on the fresh soil, the iron nail, rescued from the cottage wall. It stands upright a moment, then tilts, neither cross nor mast, simply a piece of metal remembering the shape of what hung from it longest. Years compress. The cottage returns to weather. Roof sags, door gapes, swallows nest in the rafters, weaving mud and straw the way archivists once tied ribbons. Apples keep falling unnoticed until the trunk splits under its own remembering, and the wildling leans farther, until one stormy night it lies down beside the low mound, root and branch embracing in a final, vegetative sigh. Because of course it does. In 1905, a traveling ethnographer photographs the ruin. In the margin of the print he notes, local legend, witch's house, apple wood, disappeared without trace. The picture is filed in Kharkiv, forgotten, water damaged in 1928. The nail rusts into the soil, becomes a red stain, becomes mineral, becomes, slowly, earth. Because of course it does. Inside the museum vault, the closed file rests undisturbed. The ribbon loosens, then tightens with humidity, then loosens again, practicing eternity. paper fibers bond with silk. The X and the mirror words fade until only the asterisk remains visible, a tiny star charting a course no one has plotted. Because of course it does. And you, drowsy listener, drifting on the soft creak of a chair that might be a deck, might be a cottage beam, might only be your own bones settling. You are holding the final layer, silence that once was slack, slack that once was rope, rope that once was paper, paper that once was neck. Nothing more is required. Let the nail rust, let the orchard lie down, let the vault hum its single dark note. Breathe with the tiny star in the closed box, 4 beats in, 4 beats out, until your own pulse signs an X no larger than a fingertip, and even that is optional. Because of course it is.